We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis in Meseches Moed Kattan. This is Moed Kattan Daf 27b. The Brisa continues b'chlicha again. When it came to the poor people, they would have a plain beer. They wouldn't have something fancy like a dargish like they had for the wealthy. V'hayoaniyim misbaishin, and so the poor people, they were embarrassed. Hiskinu, so they instituted shu hakol motziin b'chlicha mimnei kvoden shel aniyim, that everybody should be taken out to be buried in a plain beer because of the respect or out of respect for the aniyim. Originally, they used to put the mugmor, this was the incense that would smell nice, they would put it under those who died of an illness, of an intestinal disease, because the bodies would smell particularly bad. So the people who had the same disease but they were still alive, they would be embarrassed because they would realize that they're going to be identified in such a way when they die. So So they made an institution that they would put the mugmor underneath all dead bodies, all corpses, out of respect for those who are alive but sick with the same intestinal disease. And the Gemara continues, originally, any of the kalim that would have been used by a woman who died when she was a nida, so they would be matvil, they would immerse all of those kalim. Rashi says, al gabe nidos mesos, hakelim shenishtamshu bohen ba'odam chayim, shenitmu b'nigiyosan. The nida touched these kalim while she was alive. Shanida metame b'negiyasa adam v'kalim, because a nida is metame when she touches a person, when she touches kalim. So they used to immerse all of these kalim. Vayonidos chayos misbaishos, and so the nidos who were alive, they were embarrassed. Rashi says, Vayonidos chayos misbaishos sheosen ben masha'enos and l'shar mesos. They did by the nida, by the woman who was a nida, something different than they did by all other people, and so it was embarrassing for the women who were nidos who were alive. So eskinu shu matvilan al gabe kol hanoshim. So they made an institution that they're going to immerse the kalim by all women, mimnei kavodan shel nidos chayos, out of respect for the women who are alive who are nidos. Similarly, the Gemara says, Barishona matvilan al gabe zovin mesim. Originally, they used to immerse by, let's say somebody died when they were a zov, they would immerse all the kalim. Vayu zovin chayim isbaishin, and the zovin who were alive, they would be embarrassed. Hiskinu, so they instituted shu matvilan al gav hakol, mimnei kavodan shel zovin chayim. They instituted that they're going to immerse everything for all people, out of respect for those who are alive, who are zovin. Barishona haisa hotzoas hameis kasha lekrovav yoser mimisaso. Originally, it was more difficult to bury the dead than it was to take the fact that the person had died, meaning it was very expensive to bury somebody who had died. It got to the point where the relatives were leaving the dead body, they were running away, they didn't want to deal with it. Until Rabbi Gamliel came along, and he treated himself in a light manner, and he had himself buried in linen clothing, affordable clothing, shrouds, and therefore this was a way of making it easier upon those who were poor. And everybody had a custom followed after the custom of Rabbi Gamliel. They started to be buried in these linen shrouds. Amar Rapapa says, nowadays, no galma afila b'tsarda barzuza. People even use this hemp garment that's just worth a zuz, just worth a dinar. In other words, they're buried nowadays, says Rapapa, in very cheap, affordable garments. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Ein manichenes hamita berachov, during Chol Moed, you're not allowed to leave the mita out in the street, you're not allowed to encourage eulogies on Chol Moed. And the Gemara says, Amar Rapapa says, Ein Moed b'fnei Talmud Chacham. This rule on Chol Moed not to have eulogies does not apply to a Talmud Chacham. You can eulogize a Talmud Chacham even on Chol Moed, v'chol shekein Chanukah Purim. And for sure you can eulogize a Talmud Chacham on Chanukah and Purim. Those are even less holy than Chol Moed. V'hani mili b'fanav, and this is only true if the deceased is in front, if you're in front of the deceased. Aval shelo b'fanav lo, but if the deceased is not present, if the body is not present, then you can't eulogize on Chol Moed. Gemara says, Ini, is that really true? Rav Kahana safte l'Rav Zavid mina hardoi b'fum nara, but Rav Kahana, he eulogized Rav Zavid, and Rav Zavid was from the Hardoi, but he eulogized him in Pumnara, in a totally different city. So Amar Rapapi says, Yom Shemua Havid, that was the day that he heard about the death, v'chibafon of Dami, and that's already considered like the day you heard about it is the same thing as if the deceased is present. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ula says, Hesped Alev. When we talk about Hesped, even though it usually means eulogy, but Hesped means that you're striking the heart. We learned that from a pasuk, Techsiv, like the pasuk says, Al Shaddayim Softim, uses the word Softim, talking about striking at the area of the heart. Tipuach biyad, the word tipuach means that you're clapping the hands together. Kilos beregel, the word kilos means that you're stomping with the foot. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Hamakalis lo yikalis pesandal, somebody who's stomping his foot because of the fact that they're in mourning, so he shouldn't do it wearing sandals, ela b'minal, he should do it wearing a regular shoe, because it could be dangerous to do it with a sandal. You stomp your foot on something that's sharp or something that's otherwise dangerous. It could be a problem if you're only wearing a sandal. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Avel kevan shenina rosho. In Avel, once he shakes his head, that's like an indication that he's comforted a little bit. Shuvein menachmin rashoin leishev etzlo. So then the people who are coming to comfort him, they're no longer permitted to sit by him. He's indicating that he's already received comfort. He doesn't want people to sit by him, so they shouldn't sit by him. V'yamar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Hakol chayavin lamod mibnei nasi. Everybody is chayiv to stand up when a nasi is present. Chutz me Avel v'chola. Except for an Avel and a chola, they don't have to stand up for a nasi. V'yamar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Lachol omrim lahem shavu. To all people, the nasi can say, please be seated, and then they sit down. Let's say they stand up. Chutz me Avel v'chola. Again, except for a mourner and somebody who's sick. Let's say they stand up for the nasi, they can sit down on their own. They don't have to wait for permission. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Avel Yom Rishon, Aser Lechol Lecha Mishalo. And Avel, for the first day that he's in Avelus, he's not allowed to eat from his own bread. He has to be served food from others. Midamar Le Rachman Yechezkel. We see this from the fact that the pasuk says to Yechezkel, V'lechem anoshim lo sochel. You don't eat bread from other people. And again, Yechezkel was an exception, but in a normal situation, you're supposed to eat bread from other people. Rabbi Rav Yosef Mechalfi Sudosayu Lahadadi. The Gemara says that Rabbi and Rav Yosef, they would exchange meals when they were in mourning together, so one would give the meal to the other, so that way they weren't eating from their own bread. V'yamar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, and Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Meis bo'ir, if there's a dead body in the city that needs to be taken care of, Kol b'nei ha'ir asurin b'asiyas malacha. All the people of the city are forbidden to work. They have to busy themselves with taking care of the mace. And the Gemara continues, Rav Hamnuna ikla l'darumta. Rav Hamnuna went to the city of Darumta. Shama kol shipura d'shachvan. He heard a shofar sound that indicated someone had died. He saw that some people, they were still doing work. Amar lahu, so he said to them, these individuals, these men should be in chayrim. Lo shachva ika b'masa, isn't there a dead body in the city? Amrulei, so they said to him, chavurasa ika b'masa. We have different groups in the city. We have designated groups that are there to take care of the mace. Amar lahu, so he said to them, if that's the case, it's permitted for you to do work. As long as there's an arrangement in the city to take care of the mason, it's not a problem. V'yamar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, and Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Kol hamiskash al meso yoser midai. If somebody is too much grieving over his mace, al meis acher hu bocha. In the end, he's going to end up crying over another mace. You shouldn't grieve too much. Hahi itasa dehavis b'shevivusei de Rav Huna. There was a woman who lived in the neighborhood of Rav Huna. Havalo shiva b'ni. She had 7 sons. Meis chad minayi. One of them died. Havis kabachia b'yasirasa. She was crying. She was overly crying oleh. She was overly crying over this mace, overly grieving. Shalach la Rav Huna, so Rav Huna sent her, Lo sa'avdi hachi, don't do this. Lo ashkachabe, but she paid no attention to him. So Shalach la, so then he sent her another message. Itzayazta mutav, if you listen to me good. V'lo tzavis zavadeto le'idach meis. But he said, if you don't listen, then you should prepare shrouds for another dead body. There's going to be someone else that's going to die. Umisu kulu, and in the end, all of her children died. L'sova marla, in the end, he said to her, Teimush zavadeto le'nafshech. She was still grieving excessively. He said to her, prepare shrouds for yourself. Umisa, and she died. And the Gemara now darshans a pasuk. The pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Al tivku l'meis val tenodulo, talks about the fact, again, don't cry, don't excessively grieve over the mace. So it means to say exactly this idea, Al tivku l'meis yoser midai, val tenodulo yoser mikashir. Don't cry for the mace more than necessary, and don't grieve for the mace, don't mourn over the mace more than the amount that is prescribed. Haketzad, how so? Shlosha yamim lebechi, there are 3 days that are designated for crying. Veshiva lehesped, there are 7 days that are designated for eulogizing. Ushloshim legiyot v'letisporus, and then there are 30 days a person should refrain from ironing the clothing and from haircuts. Mikan va'elech, and from then on, from beyond 30 days, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Iatem rachmonim bo yoser mimeni. You don't need to have more mercy on him than I do. In other words, I prescribe a certain amount of time for mourning. That's the amount. It shouldn't be more than that. B'cho laholech, this also is a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. The Gemara is going to darshan, cry for those who go on. Amar Rav Yehuda darshans the pasuk laholech below banim. It means you cry specifically for those who die without children. Rav Yoshua ben Levi lo azal lebe'avla el leman da'azal below banim. Rav Yoshua ben Levi, he wouldn't go to the house of a mourner except for somebody who died without children. Dechsiv, like the pasuk says, b'chu laholech ki lo yoshavod v'roa seretz mo'oladato. Cry for the one who went. He won't return anymore. He won't see the land that he was born in. Now, Rav Huna understands this pasuk differently. Rav Huna says, Zeh she'avar aveira v'shanaba. This pasuk is actually referring to somebody who does an aveira and he repeats that aveira. And the Gemara says, Rav Huna l'taimi. Rav Huna here is following his opinion. The Amar Rav Huna, because Rav Huna stated in another place, Kevan she'avar adam aveira v'shanaba. When somebody does an aveira and repeats it, hutrolo, it becomes mutter for him. The Gemara says, Hutralo, you really think it's mutter to do the Avera now? Salkadaitach, is that possible? Do you think that's the case? Rather, the Gemara says what he means to say is, when you do an Avera and you repeat it, so then it becomes as if it's mutter. That's what this pasuk is referring to. The person goes and repeats the Avera, and it becomes like it's mutter for that individual. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Levi says, Avil shlosha yamim harishonim, and Avil the first 3 days, Yires atzmo kilu cherev munachas lo ben shtei archosav. He should view it as if there's a sword between his thighs. In other words, he should view the situation as if he himself is in imminent danger. Mishlosha ad shiva, from the 3rd day until the 7th day, kilu munachas lo kenegdo b'keren zavis. He should view it as though the sword is opposite him in the corner. He's in danger, but not in so much danger. Mikan v'elach, from then on, kilu overes kenegdo b'shuk. It should be as if it's passing him by the marketplace again. The danger has lessened. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, v'lo shel nasham li'olam ne'akavad. You don't place the bier of women in the middle of the street ever, because it's not respectful. Amri nahardoi, they said in nahardoi, lo shanu, this was only taught, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph.